Welcome. Today we're diving into something absolutely fundamental to, well, to any functioning democracy, really, and that's trust in the vote.
Right, whether it's, a big national election or even just a local shareholder vote, if people don't trust the process, the whole thing loses legitimacy.
And specifically with elections, that trust hangs on two incredibly important ideas that are almost always pushing against each other.
Exactly. You've got, on one side, this need to guarantee one person, one vote. Absolute, verifiable uniqueness. Everyone who's eligible votes once, nobody votes twice.
And then on the other side, you absolutely have to protect the secrecy of that vote, total anonymity. So voters aren't pressured, they aren't tracked, they don't face payback later.
And keeping those two things intact, simultaneously proving who someone is without knowing how they voted, that's the real tightrope walk.
It really is. And when you try to bring voting into the digital age, that tension, it becomes this massive challenge. Most of the ways we've tried it they fall short.
Yeah, they really do. Traditional digital voting ideas, they almost always bump up against the problem of centralization.
Meaning
They rely on some central database somewhere. Could be a government server, could be a private company's cloud. But the moment you have that single point where all the data lives,
you've got a problem.
a huge one. That central database is like a giant target. It's vulnerable to hackers getting in from the outside, sure, but also to insiders messing with the data.
And critically, for democracy anyway, it allows for tracking.
Right.
If one entity, whoever runs that database, can connect voter X to vote Y,
then the secrecy pillar just crumbles completely. And that's why you see so much pushback, so much distrust whenever these purely centralized digital voting systems get proposed. People instinctively get that vulnerability.
So, okay, we want the benefits of digital speed, accessibility, maybe lower costs, but we absolutely cannot sacrifice democratic integrity. There's this gap.
A big gap. But the material we're looking at today suggests there might be a way to bridge it. And interestingly, it doesn't rely on fixing centralization. It relies on fundamentally different cryptography.
And that brings us to Linkspreed's Universal Integrated Identity Decoupled System, UID for short.
Right. UID is positioned as, well, potentially the core identity layer for this whole idea of Web4. And the claim is that its architecture is specifically built to resolve that tension we talked about, uniqueness versus anonymity.
So it's not just about making voting digital, it's about using a new kind of digital structure to eliminate the main ways elections get compromised.
That's the idea. Tackling the architecture itself to prevent the most common types of fraud.
Okay, so that's our plan for this deep dive then. We're going to unpack how this UIID system works piece by piece. We want to understand how it uses its specific technology to fight, number one, impersonation, making sure it really is one person, one vote.
Number two, manipulation that comes from linking voter data. So guaranteeing that anonymity and ballot secrecy.
And number three, the problem of opaque vote counts, ensuring the final tally is transparent and auditable, something everyone can trust.
So the big question is, could this kind of decoupled approach, using these specific crypto tools, be the breakthrough needed for genuinely secure digital democracy?
Let's get into it. Starting with that first massive hurdle, uniqueness. How do you absolutely guarantee in a digital world that every eligible person votes exactly once?
Yeah, this is maybe the foundational challenge. Forget digital for a second. Even with paper ballots, this is hard. But online, where creating fake accounts or deploying bots can be, frankly, pretty easy. It's exponentially harder.
And the old digital methods struggled here because they usually tied the identity check directly to the act of voting in that central database we mentioned.
Right, you log in with your official credential, you cast your vote, and bam, there's a record in the server. User 123 voted for candidate A. That link is the problem.
So how does UID approach this differently? You mentioned a dual-tier model?
Exactly, it separates the functions. Think of it like having two different types of ID for two very different jobs, all managed cryptographically.
Okay. Tier 1.
Tier 1 is the core ID. This is designed to be your primary, super secure, verifiable digital identity, the kind of thing you'd need for really high-trust situations.
Like the digital equivalent of opening a bank account, maybe, that know your customer or KYC process?
Precisely. The sources describe establishing this core ID as a serious high-assurance process. It's not just uploading a selfie. It likely involves linking to existing robust identity systems, maybe government ID databases, but verified through multiple secure channels, potentially even offline steps.
So the goal is to create a really strong, cryptographically unique anchor for your identity, one that's very, very hard to fake or duplicate.
Exactly, a cryptographic root of trust. Now, in an election context, this Core ID has a very specific, very limited job. It's used only for the initial registration, to prove you are who you say you are, that you're eligible to vote according to the election rules, and that you haven't registered already. It establishes that cryptographic proof of eligibility.
Okay, so it's like showing your passport at the border to prove you're allowed in. You show it once, they verify it, maybe stamp it cryptographically speaking.
Right, and once that eligibility is confirmed, once the system knows this unique Core ID is registered and eligible, the Core ID itself basically steps aside.
It doesn't touch the ballot.
Never. It's done its job. Its only role was that initial gatekeeping. This is absolutely critical for the decoupling part.
Okay. So if the Core ID proves eligibility but doesn't cast the vote, what does? That brings us to Tier 2.
Right. Tier 2 is where the actual authentication happens during the voting act itself.
Yeah.
And this relies heavily on something called zero-knowledge proofs, or ZKPs.
ZKPs, we hear a lot about these in crypto contexts. Can you break down what they actually do here? Because they sound a bit like magic.
They do sound like magic, but they're based on solid cryptography. Essentially, a ZKP lets you, the prover in this case, the voter, prove to someone else, the verifier, the election system or network, that you know or possess something specific.
Like a valid, registered Core ID.
Exactly. Without actually revealing the thing you possess. You prove ownership or knowledge without showing the data itself.
Okay, an analogy might help here because this feels like the linchpin.
Sure. Imagine you have a secret key that opens a unique digital lockbox. The lockbox represents your registered Core ID status. You need to prove to the election guard that you hold the one and only key to that specific box, proving you're the registered voter for that box.
But you absolutely cannot show the guard the key itself or even tell them the serial number on the lockbox because that would link you.
Precisely. A zero-knowledge proof is like a clever mathematical protocol where you can convince the guard you have the key, maybe by answering specific challenges that only the key holder could answer without ever letting them see the key or the box number.
So the guard becomes convinced mathematically, yep, this person holds the valid key for one registered lockbox, but they learn nothing else. No key shape, no box number.
That's the core idea. Applied to voting with UIID.
Yeah.
You, the voter, use your device to generate a ZKP. This proof mathematically demonstrates to the decentralized network, I possess the credentials linked to a valid registered Core ID that hasn't voted yet.
And the network checks the math of the proof.
Correct. The network verifies the ZKP. It confirms, yes, this is a valid proof originating from one unique eligible registered Core ID that has permission to cast one vote. But crucially, the network never sees the Core ID itself during this process.
Wow, okay. That really is the decoupling step then. The system confirms a unique voter is present and authorized.
It enforces the one person, one vote rule cryptographically.
But it does so without ever learning the actual identity of that voter at the moment of voting. The identity verification via Core ID registration is separated in time and process from the anonymous authentication via ZKP used to cast the vote.
Exactly right. It separates being eligible from the act of voting. The ZKP bridges that gap anonymously.
So how does this stop someone from voting twice? If the Core ID isn't directly involved in the vote transaction?
Because the ZKP is tied to the Core ID's state on the ledger. When you successfully generate that ZKP and the network validates it for voting, the system cryptographically marks your Core ID's participation slot as used.
Okay.
So if you or anyone else trying to use credentials linked to that same Core ID attempts to generate another ZKP to vote again,
the network check fails.
Instantly. The validation process sees that the unique participation slot linked to that Core ID proof is already filled. It rejects the second attempt. It's not looking up a name in a database. It's checking an immutable cryptographic state on a distributed ledger.
So uniqueness is enforced by math and the ledger state, not by a vulnerable central list linking names to votes.
That's the fundamental shift.
Okay, that architecture sounds robust for uniqueness. But the obvious question comes up. What if the initial step, the Core ID creation, is compromised? If the system relies on, say, a flawed national ID database to issue those Core IDs in the first place, isn't that just shifting the weak point early in the process?
That's a very important point and absolutely a potential vulnerability. The integrity of the whole system does depend heavily on the trustworthiness of that initial Core ID issuance. Garbage in, garbage out, right?
Right.
However, the way UID is described, that Core ID issuance isn't necessarily tied to just one single source of truth. Being foundational for Web4, it likely aims to integrate multiple verifiable credentials or proofs.
So maybe it needs proof from a government ID and proof of address and maybe biometric verification, all cryptographically bound, making it much harder to fake.
Potentially, yes. The idea is to make that initial verification extremely robust, maybe even leveraging decentralized identity principles within the Core ID issuance itself. It doesn't eliminate the need for trusted identity sources, but it aims to make the process far more resilient and verifiable than just relying on one database.
So the architectural win isn't necessarily eliminating trust in identity verification, but maybe moving that trust to a more secure, multifaceted, and cryptographically verifiable process before the election even starts, rather than trusting a potentially opaque counting process after.
That's a good way to put it. You front-load the high-assurance identity verification, making it as strong as possible, and then rely on the cryptography, the ZKPs and decoupling, to handle the anonymous voting part securely.
Okay, so if we accept that the Core ID plus ZKP mechanism can strongly guarantee the one person, one vote rule, we need to tackle the other side, anonymity. How does UIID make absolutely sure the ballot itself is secret?
Right, because stopping duplicate votes isn't enough. You also have to prevent coercion, vote selling, or governments tracking how specific groups voted to punish them later. These are insidious threats to democracy.
And these threats become really potent if there's any way to link the verified identity, even if it was checked earlier, back to the specific choice made on the ballot.
Exactly. And this is where the second part of that dual-tier system comes into play. Aliases.
Aliases. So these aren't the Core ID.
Not at all. Think of the Core ID as your permanent high-security digital passport, used only for that initial one-time registration check. Aliases are more like disposable prepaid debit cards or temporary email addresses, but secured with cryptography.
Okay. And you can have lots of them.
According to the sources, yes. Users can generate many aliases. They're designed for everyday, lower-stakes transactions where you need a functional identifier on the network but don't want to expose your core identity. And crucially, they're designed to be anonymous on the public ledger.
So they're not inherently linked back to the Core ID in any publicly visible way.
Correct. There's a cryptographic link managed privately by the user, but externally, an alias doesn't reveal the Core ID it stems from.
I think I see where this is going. The actual vote isn't cast using the ZKP directly linked to the Core ID status.
No. The ZKP proves you are allowed to vote based on your Core ID status. But the transaction of casting the vote, the thing that gets recorded with the actual choice, is initiated by one of your anonymous aliases.
Okay, walk me through that interaction.
So you've used your ZKP to get a voting token or permission from the network, proving your eligibility anonymously. Now you use one of your aliases, let's call it alias 123, to submit your actual vote choice, say yes on a referendum, to the tallying system.
And what gets recorded on the public auditable ledger?
The ledger records that a valid vote was cast, validated by the initial ZKP step ensuring uniqueness, and that the choice yes was submitted by alias 123.
But alias 123 itself is anonymous.
Right. And because you can generate countless aliases, and the Core ID was only used for that initial ZKP authorization step, which didn't reveal the Core ID, connecting the vote yes from alias 123 back to your specific verified Core ID becomes computationally infeasible. It's practically impossible.
So an observer sees that a valid vote was cast and what the vote was, but they cannot link it back to the who. The alias acts as a complete firewall between the verified identity and the vote content.
Precisely. It breaks that critical link that plagues centralized systems.
Yeah.
Even if someone could somehow compromise or track alias 123, it doesn't lead them back to your Core ID. You can just use a different alias next time.
That sounds like a powerful layer of obfuscation. But where does all this user data, the Core ID link the alias has generated, actually live? Is there still a central place storing it?
Good question. This brings us to another key architectural piece, the Decentralized Identity Vault, or sometimes just called the user's vault or wallet.
Okay, so this isn't on a government server.
No. This is designed to be personal, user-controlled storage. Think of it like an encrypted file on your own device or personal cloud storage managed by your keys. It's based on the principle of self-sovereign identity. Your data belongs to you.
And what does this vault store in the context of voting?
It stores your cryptographic keys, your Core ID credentials, securely encrypted, of course, the links between your Core ID and the aliases you've generated.
But does it store how I voted?
This is critical. No. The vault needs to record that you participated in the election using your Core ID's eligibility. This is necessary because the ZKP relies on proving you haven't voted yet, so there needs to be a record somewhere, though maybe cryptographically obscured, that you did participate after voting.
Okay, a participation record makes sense for the uniqueness check.
Right. It might store a cryptographic commitment or a hash confirming participation occurred linked to this Core ID. But the vault explicitly does not store the content of your vote, your actual choice.
So the link between Jane Doe participated and Jane Doe voted for candidate B doesn't exist anywhere, not even in my own private vault.
Correct. The vault knows you used your eligibility participation. The public ledger knows an anonymous alias cast a vote for candidate B. But there's no single place, public or private, that holds the combined record. Jane Doe voted for candidate B.
That seems strategically brilliant, actually, because it removes the incentive for certain types of attacks.
Exactly. Why would a government or a hacker try to break into millions of individual user vaults if the information they want the voter's choice linked to their identity isn't even stored there?
And they can't get it from a central election server either, because that server also only sees votes from anonymous aliases validated by ZKPs that don't reveal the Core ID.
Right. It fundamentally changes the game. Instead of a central honeypot database linking voter X to vote Y, you have a system where participation is verified uniquely via ZKP, but the vote itself is cast anonymously via an alias, and the link is broken. The data needed for mass coercion or retribution simply isn't aggregated anywhere.
It forces any potential manipulator to attack the system in completely different, much harder ways, rather than just stealing or altering a central list.
It pushes the security to the cryptographic protocols
Gross.
and the distributed nature of the system rather than relying on securing one specific server.
Okay, so we've covered uniqueness with the Core ID and ZKPs, and anonymity with the aliases and the user-controlled vault breaking the link. That brings us to the third crucial piece: trust in the final count itself.
The popular count, whether it's a referendum result or a general election tally. How do we know the final numbers being reported are accurate and haven't been tampered with?
This is often where trust breaks down, right? Even if people believe individuals voted correctly, they might suspect the counting process itself is flawed or biased or happening in some black box they can't see inside.
Absolutely. Opaque counting rooms, proprietary software nobody can inspect, delays in reporting results. These all breed suspicion.
So how does the UIID architecture address this need for a transparent, auditable tally?
It leverages the nature of the underlying infrastructure, the decentralized secure network we've been talking about, which sounds a lot like a blockchain or distributed ledger technology.
Okay, so the votes cast by those anonymous aliases.
Once validated by the ZKP, confirming eligibility and uniqueness, they get cryptographically signed and recorded onto this shared immutable ledger.
Immutable meaning?
Meaning, once a record, a validated vote, is written to the ledger and confirmed by the network consensus, it cannot be changed or deleted ever. It's like carving it into digital stone.
And decentralized means it's not just one organization's server recording this, it's copied across many independent computers.
Exactly. Thousands, potentially. Which makes censorship or unilateral alteration virtually impossible.
Okay, so every valid anonymous vote leaves an unchangeable, publicly verifiable record on this distributed ledger. How does that translate into trust in the total count?
It enables real-time, independent auditability. Because the ledger is public, or at least accessible to authorized auditors, anyone, election monitors, NGOs, journalists, even competing political parties, can basically watch the votes get tallied as they come in.
They're not just waiting for an official announcement hours or days later.
No. They can run their own node or use tools to query the ledger directly. They can independently verify every single transaction as it's added.
What are they verifying specifically?
Two main things. First, they verify the cryptographic proof associated with each vote transaction. They check that each vote added to the tally was indeed preceded by a valid ZKP, confirming it came from a unique, eligible source that hadn't voted before.
So they're constantly checking that the one person, one vote rule is being upheld for the entire pool of votes coming in.
Correct. They're verifying the eligibility underpinning the entire count. Second, because the ledger is immutable, they're verifying the integrity of the tally itself. They can sum up all the valid confirmed votes recorded on the ledger themselves.
Meaning they can calculate the total count independently of the official election authority.
Precisely. They can confirm that the total count matches the sum of the immutable cryptographic records. They can see that no votes have been added illicitly, None have been removed, and none have been altered after being cast.
So if the official body announces a result that differs, even slightly, from the total on the verifiable public ledger,
The discrepancy is immediately obvious to anyone auditing the ledger. There's no room for hidden manipulation in the tabulation phase. The trust shifts from believing a specific organization counted correctly to verifying the mathematical integrity of the public ledger.
that is a profound shift. It moves from trust us to verify it yourself.
It really does. It provides an immediate, globally verifiable popular count based on cryptographic proof, not just institutional assertions.
Now, are there still potential attack vectors here? What about, say, a denial of service attack trying to flood the network and prevent people from casting votes in the first place?
That's definitely a concern for any digital system. However, the sources suggest that because UIID is envisioned as foundational infrastructure for Web4, underpinning potentially commerce, identity, and more, the network itself would need to be incredibly resilient.
Built to withstand large-scale traffic and attacks, presumably distributed across many nodes globally.
One would assume so. You're likely talking about a very robust distributed network, making a successful large-scale DOS attack difficult, though perhaps not impossible. But importantly, it removes the single point of failure vulnerability of a centralized voting server.
Right. An attack might disrupt, but it can't easily alter the results already immutably recorded or compromise the entire system through one central breach.
Exactly. It forces attackers to target a massively distributed system rather than one or two servers.
Okay. It feels like we've covered the main architectural pillars now. Let's try and quickly summarize how UII aims to solve those core electoral fraud problems.
Sounds good. So first, tackling impersonation and duplicate voting. That's the Core ID for high-trust initial registration, combined with zero-knowledge proofs for anonymous authentication during voting. One person, one vote, enforced cryptographically.
Right. Second, ensuring anonymity and preventing coercion or tracking. That's the use of disposable, anonymous aliases to cast the actual vote, completely decoupling it from the core ID. Plus, the user-controlled vault ensures sensitive linked data isn't stored centrally or even personally. Ballot secrecy is preserved.
And third, ensuring a trustworthy count. That's the decentralized immutable ledger where every validated anonymous vote is recorded transparently. This allows for real-time independent auditing by anyone, ensuring the final tally is accurate and tamper-proof.
So by tackling uniqueness, anonymity, and auditability through this specific decoupled architecture, the argument is that UID can, well, potentially eliminate the most significant ways elections are currently vulnerable to fraud in the digital realm.
It certainly seems to address the primary weaknesses of traditional digital approaches: impersonation through weak ID checks, manipulation through centralized data linkage, and lack of transparency in counting. It offers a technologically coherent framework for secure digital democracy.
It really does position itself as perhaps the missing technical foundation needed to make online voting truly viable and trustworthy on a large scale.
And remember, the context is even broader. UID isn't just presented as a voting solution.
Right. It's framed as the identity layer for Web4.
Which brings us to a fascinating closing thought. If this architecture, this combination of high-trust verifiable identity, anonymous transactional capability, and decentralized auditability is robust enough to secure something as sensitive and critical as a national election,
Which arguably requires the absolute highest standards for uniqueness, privacy, and integrity all at once.
then what else can it secure?
That's the question to leave everyone with, isn't it? If UID can solve the digital democracy challenge, think about its potential impact elsewhere. Imagine truly secure, user-controlled, globally verifiable identity for things like international travel, accessing healthcare records across borders, complex financial transactions.
Anyway, you need to prove who you are with high assurance for one purpose, while interacting anonymously or pseudo-anonymously for another, all while maintaining transparency and control.
If it works for the vote, it might just reshape how we manage trust and identity across the entire digital world. Solving democracy's digital dilemma could just be the first step.